Well, good evening, everybody. I'll wait till Greg and Jim are done talking. All right, good evening. Man, it's been so rainy out. It's been so dreary, but even it's been raining hard. I thought my car would be floating away or something like that. Oh, no. Yeah, this is a week. This is a good week to avoid trees. So we're going to continue our way through the Sermon on the Mount, as recorded in Matthew 5 through 7. So we've covered the Beatitudes. We've covered that little section of verses, considering our calling to be salt and light. We've pondered what it means for Christ to be the fulfillment of the law. And now we have kind of moved into really the main thrust or the body of this sermon. And really for this first chapter, and much going forward, Jesus is really just addressing various topics and teachings concerning the Mosaic law, the Old Testament law, which coincidentally was also given on a mountain. And so each of these sections have been beginning with a phrase where Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said," and then he'll go on to tell them what it was that was said. And a lot of these are just direct quotations from the Old Testament, but the religious leaders have kind of distorted or warped or twisted the interpretation of these verses, or they've added to it, or kind of fit it to their agenda or whatever meaning that they wanted to have. And so verse 19 of chapter 5 really is not really like a thesis, but it's a really like a good springboard from the rest of where the sermon is going to be coming from. He says, "Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven." So really, from that point forward into the main body of this sermon, that's what he's addressing, right? The relaxing of these commandments that has been taking place, and Jesus kind of restore them back to their proper, get the proper weight back to these things again, make them clear and simple in their understanding. And so that verse addresses a lot of what we see Jesus doing in the Sermon on the Mount, correcting a lot of bad teaching from the religious leaders, again, kind of using the Old Testament law to kind of suit their own purposes, really, and not letting the purposes of God in his law be the standard, be the thing that we are all trying to look to and learn from. And that's in the negative sense. And in the positive sense, at the end of that verse, he's teaching us what the kingdom of God looks like, right? The kind of citizens that God is creating for in this kingdom. And ultimately, he is communicating to us the heart of the king of this kingdom, of the one that this kingdom is born from, of who God is, who Jesus himself is. And as he stated earlier in this section, right, he is the fulfillment of this law, of all that he is, and not even just the Old Testament law, but all the things that he is going to be talking about in this sermon. Jesus, he fulfills all of these things, and we kind of point to various aspects of his ministry and his character and his nature that can show us how he has fulfilled all of these things. And so he addresses each of these areas of the law by stating again, "You have heard that it was said." He did that back in 21 and 22. Where he's addressing anger, he says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.' And then he says, 'But I say to you,'" and that will be a theme we'll see throughout again. Then he moved to Matthew 5, 27 and 28. "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart.' And then last week, it was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife,'" and then he'll go on, "but I say to you again." And so that is going to continue on up to the verses that we are even in this evening, up until the end of chapter 5 about is when he's going to kind of change the phrasing of how he's going to open up all those sections. But again, this is not how the rabbis of the day taught. Usually, right, they would be teaching or interpreting the Word of God in light of what other rabbis have previously taught. So not really kind of putting any skin in the game, so to speak, but relying on someone else's name to get all their credibility. I'm just following this rabbi's school of thought kind of thing. No real authority of themselves as they are teaching the law, the Word of God. And as you can imagine, when Jesus comes onto the scene and starts saying, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you, right? Completely new language, not how anyone at that time taught. The reaction we see at the end of this sermon makes a lot of sense. So if you just flip ahead real quick to Matthew 7, at the end, it says, when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, right? For he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. So we approach our passage this evening much in the same way as we've been approaching them, and we'll start with verse 33. It says, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. So Jesus, again, is pointing the hearer back to the Mosaic law, and we can find this prohibition in 3 places. The first is Leviticus 19:12. It says, you shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Numbers 30, verse 2 says, if a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. And Deuteronomy 23, 21 and 20 through 23 says, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. You shall be careful to do what has passed your lips, for you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. So even in just that Deuteronomy passage, if you just read that, it seems like Jesus doesn't really need to even say what he says. It's very much mirroring what Jesus is saying. In Deuteronomy, it's saying, right, refrain from vowing, you won't be guilty. And Jesus is saying, you don't take an oath. It seems like, okay, well, where could we have gotten off? Like, where's the misunderstanding? We'll get there in a few minutes. But before we go any further, let's level the ground a little bit so we can all start at the same place. So what are we talking about here? What exactly is an oath? And I'll ask you, what is happening when an oath is made? So I would like answers if you have any thoughts.
Like a vow or a promise to do something.
Yeah, a promise to do something. Yeah, that's great. Anything else? You like that answer? Class is behind it. What's that?
Promise to God.
A promise to God. Yep. Yeah, so it could be a promise to really anyone, right? So it could be to God, it could be to a person, but what is happening is you're basically guaranteeing an outcome, so to speak, or you're guaranteeing an action will take place, or something future beyond the moment you are speaking will occur or take place, right? And if we look at the context of verse 33, right, Jesus is speaking of a kind of guarantee that you will fulfill some kind of requirement. So again, it might be taking an action. It might be bringing about some kind of result. And Numbers 30 speaks in the same light. It says, do according to what proceeds from your mouth. And the Deuteronomy passage is much the same. It says, do what has passed from your lips. The Leviticus passage kind of adds another element to it, or another way that an oath can be made. And in the Leviticus 19 perspective, an oath is kind of calling God to be a witness to something. So you're testifying to a truth claim, and you're calling on someone outside of yourself to back up your credibility on making that a true thing. So my brother, when I was younger, my brother, and I think every kid kind of goes through an I promise phase where they really want to get their younger sibling, who was me, to do a certain action or to trust them for something so they could get their way. And so my brother all the time would say, I promise if you do this, like nothing bad will happen. I promise I won't tell on you, or things like that. So that kind of thing, you're trying to build a credibility or establish that this is a true thing. If you believe me, then you choosing to believe me is right because I'm telling you the truth. So in our day and age, right, you'll hear people say, I swear, or I swear to fill in the blank, right? All sorts of colorful language there, but that's kind of how we see it in today's age. And it's interesting, we actually see Paul doing this in the New Testament in quite a few places. He'll call on God to be his witness as he's telling, or he's writing to these churches who clearly are struggling with some, whether it's kind of a doubt in Paul's credibility as an apostle, or someone else is kind of whispering lies, saying, hey, don't believe what Paul is saying, and Paul is having to write to them and say, hey, I'm calling God as my witness that these things are true. He actually does that quite a bit. So let me ask you, is Jesus saying it is a sin to make an oath? Hard to know.
He's saying it's a sin to break the oath if you make the
Yeah.
oath.
Has your hand too?
Well, I was going to say, it's not so much the oath, it's you're saying the oath to back up something that you either can't fulfill or have no intention to fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
Another Old Testament section is in Ecclesiastes 5.
Yeah.
You're going to get there?
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's not so much that taking the oath is the sin. The fact is that you're trying to boost your rep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so when does the sin arrive? Is it when the oath is made? It's once it's broken, right, essentially. So we'll get to this in a little bit, but you're essentially laying the groundwork for sin to take place, right? Sin hasn't taken place, but you're giving it an opportunity to do so. So we'll get back to that. But, right, in the context right, so when the oath is violated is when the sin is born, so to speak, right? When you fail to do what you've sworn to do. And if we're looking at the Leviticus passage of calling on the name of the Lord especially, right? So now we're kind of entering into, right, the commandment 3, right? Taking the name of the Lord your God in vain, right? This is where we kind of enter into this territory. So using, right, when we swear by the name of the Lord, oftentimes, especially when it's done rashly, whether you're going to fulfill the vow or not, if it's done in a rashness, there could be sin made, I would argue, at the oath itself. Because if you're not thinking about what you're saying and you're just calling on the name of the Lord as a part of your oath making, you're probably misrepresenting who God is in that moment in that way. You're mischaracterizing him, right? You're using his name in a way that's empty of meaning, or maybe you're even treating his name as something that's equal to something of the lesser order of creation, right? So that would be a violation of the third commandment, which is, again, we're gonna see in a second that this is where the religious leaders have kind of gotten off in their thinking. So Jesus obviously isn't taking issue with the law, right? The law had a regulation around oath making, right? If you're going to do it, do it. He's not taking issue with the law. Again, it's what's being done with the law. And I've said this before, but when we look at some of the problems in just how human beings do things, whether it's in society and culture presently, I would say that a lot of the big sin issues that we see in society and culture stem from we take something God has made or ordained or created, and we stop really caring what the intention of it is, or we stop asking what it's for, and we start asking ourselves what we can do with it, right? Like how can I work or play with this thing or toy with this thing to suit my purposes? And oftentimes I'll give the picture of a laptop just because it's a silly picture, but if you hand someone a laptop who's never seen one before, right, and you don't tell them what it is or how to use it, right, they might play with it in ways that, they might use it for a puppet show, just opening and closing it and pretending to talk, right? Or they might see that, this is a very flat object, maybe I can skip it across the pond, right, as like you're skipping stones. But regardless, what happens is they're probably going to end up destroying that thing, and they're definitely not going to be using that thing to accomplish even a fraction of what you could accomplish if you knew what it was for, right? So, you can access the internet on this thing. You can type up documents. You can access the world's information, right? All these great things that you can do with a computer. But ultimately, when we stop asking what something is for and we start asking ourselves what we can do with it, how we can play around with it, we'll miss its intended design, and we'll actually end up probably destroying the very thing itself, right? And so that's what's happening really with all of these commands, and especially with oath-taking, right? The religious leaders, they didn't really care about the heart posture behind the oath, right? The care for honesty, right? And for integrity and these things. What they cared about was trying to achieve their own purposes. So, like I said, they didn't really. No one wanted to be guilty of breaking the third commandment, right? The Pharisees, they didn't want that to be seen of them. So a way that they would get around taking the name of the Lord their God in vain was to swear by other things, right? So that's why Jesus, if you look at verses 35, right, or 34 and 35, it says, "Do not take an oath at all, either by heaven or by the earth, or by Jerusalem, or then in verse 36, by your own head. Jesus is saying these things specifically because that's what the religious leaders were swearing by. He's not just imagining things, right? So the religious leaders would actually swear by heaven. They would swear by earth. They would swear by Jerusalem. They would swear by their own head, whatever they could think of. Essentially, as like in their mind, like a loophole. Like I'm not swearing on the Lord, so I'm not guilty of using His name in vain. But here I am. I'm not going to be liable to this divine judgment in that sense if it turns out that they're wrong or the oath is broken in some sense. So they're trying to kind of twist it and find a loophole around it. But as Jesus is teaching us, you can't really get around it because everything belongs to the Lord, right? So if you're swearing by heaven, there's nothing you can swear by in creation that would somehow exclude God from the picture, right? That's essentially what Jesus is saying, right? When someone swears by something and they're calling it to be a witness, right, even though heaven itself fundamentally can't really be a witness, or earth can't really be a witness because of their objects, or Jerusalem or your head, right, the ruler, the sovereign over these things can, and He is. So to swear by God or really anything else, you're essentially just thinking very little of the Lord you are swearing by. And if you're swearing by creation, you actually are swearing by the Lord because He rules over these things. These things belong to Him; they are His. And again, it's proof that we are thinking much less of the God that we are in service to, or we love and respect. So. The second reason that we see that he says not to give an oath is seen in verse 36. And this one's really clear. Simply, we cannot guarantee anything in this life. We just don't have that kind of power. So he says, don't swear by your own head because, you have no power to make your hairs black or white or anything else. And the Jews, as I've said, they made it a common practice to swear by other things for deceptive purposes, to get the person to believe that what they're saying is true. They would swear by these things. And so, right, your head doesn't listen to you, right? The hairs don't change color whether you want them to or not. You can't make your hair grow or get shorter. Well, I guess you could cut it, but you can't make the hair go backwards, and you can't tell it to not fall out if you want it to or not. And so all an oath really does, therefore, as we stated from what Mark was saying, we're going to read it in a second in Ecclesiastes 5, but all an oath really does is it lays a trap for us to walk into. Right? All it's really doing is just providing us an opportunity to fail in fulfilling it, and therefore leading us into sin. So we're going to read Ecclesiastes 5 right now. This is found in verses 4 through 7. It says, when you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for He has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin. And do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. And he goes on from there. But that last part, let not your mouth lead you into sin, to me is the heart of that section right there. Right. Once the oath is made, it puts you into position of needing to guarantee it to be true or take place. Right. But how can we do that? We can't. Right. I think of. The best example I could think of was Wile E. Coyote. And my generation might think of Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. But if you guys know the cartoon character, Wile E. Coyote, every time he lays out a trap, what happens with that trap? Who does it catch? It gets him, right? So you're watching him pull out all the weaponry. He's dipping into the arsenal. He's pulling out the TNT, and he's laying this whole strip across the road, right, to catch Roadrunner. And inevitably, as he's pulling out all these pieces of equipment to catch the Roadrunner, you know, watching it, that, man, it's going to hurt you real bad because we know that at the end of this whole thing, you're going to be the one who's feeling the pain from all the things that you're putting out, right? Right? That's essentially what I thought of when I thought of making oath-taking and making oaths, right? You're laying down the TNT blocks, essentially, for yourself, right? It's just an unnecessary risk. And Jesus is pointing out just how foolish it is and just how powerless we are and how unable we are to make these guarantees happen. And I think in the New Testament, a good parallel to this kind of understanding and this teaching comes from James. In James 4, verses 13 through 17, it says, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes, right? Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that, right? So he's just saying, right, it's very foolish to speak this way, right? To make these plans and to make these guarantees and to put so much weight on these things happening when we are so powerless to make these things happen, right? It's the Lord who is the one who orchestrates all these things and who knows all these things and who has the power to make things come about when he speaks them. So the wise thing to do is not to not plan at all. It's just to have the perspective to say, if the Lord allows these things to happen, right? If he wills these things to happen. So looming beneath the surface of all these verses is this idea that we cannot guarantee anything, right? And to do so is arrogance. That's what James will say later on. As it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil, right? We are claiming power we do not have. So something that this passage does, right, as does the entire Sermon on the Mount, is Jesus continually points out, or we should be taking away, our inability to actually live into the law as it was laid out for us, right? Our inability to make an oath in a proper way, our inability to express anger in a godly way, or our inability, right, all these things, to live according to the law perfectly, right? It's better to not make an oath, but to simply mean what you say when you say it. So this teaching from Jesus, like all the topics prior, it also increases the weight of what's being addressed. So oath-making is now free from, he's trying to free it from the distortion that the teachers of the day have kind of added to it. He's trying to make it, have it be seen clearly, and have the vows that we make be seen more significantly. Right, and so one vow that I consider is the marriage vow, and there are many other vows that are godly vows that we make. It could be a vow in a court to tell the truth, right? It could be we have child dedications here where the parents will make a vow before the congregation and to themselves and to their children to raise them up in the ways of the Lord, right? And so as we read this passage and we consider oath taking and what Jesus is saying about it, right? What might this prompt us to do as there are oaths and there are vows and there are promises that we do make and that I would say are good to make in those respects? How do we learn from this passage concerning those things, would you guys say?
So I think this reminds me of like what you said earlier, to like be careful what we say,
Mm-hmm.
and then how much like we're committing to something. Like I think of Jephthah in the Old Testament, who made this promise to God that like if you let me win in battle, whatever comes out of my front door, I will kill for you. And it happened to be his daughter, and he was like, well, I have to kill her, you know, like, and she's like, it's okay, like, I understand, but it's just like a twisted version where maybe he wasn't scheming in this, but he was also like putting whatever on the line without really thinking about, well, what could actually walk out your front door, and what might you feel compelled to do about it? Should you win this battle? And so it's just a tragic story.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a it should kind of like sober us to what we are actually committing ourselves to, and have us to consider what we are committing ourselves to, and to be formulating, right, what kind of decisions do I need to make now in order to help me along the way as I begin walking in this direction, right? And so to fail to think ahead and to rashly make something, it might show a lack of understanding of what you're actually committing yourself to in the first place. Yeah. Anyone else?
A few verses from that Ecclesiastes section that we looked at. I think it sets the tone. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer sacrifices. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. And we have a song, therefore let your words be few. Right, so there's an understanding that if I say this, that there's a fear of God in it, right? That's informing it, and it's not just, again, we talked being brash, being boastful, jumping into it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think something that's kind of cool. It kind of makes me think of like a psalmate. Like, what is man that you were mindful of? And just that kind of attitude when you consider what the Lord is saying about our speech and how important it is and the weight that it has when we say things and we come before him and speak to him in these ways. It's not like, maybe, it's not certainly not just our culture, but right, I think in our day and age, speech has become so flippant, right? It's so easy to you think of like digitally, how easy it is to comment on things and to say things and not really be attached or associated to it. And so it's become really easy in our minds to kind of detach the things that we say from really being associated to us in our hearts at all. And what the Lord is saying is that, no, right? What's proceeding out of your mouth is very significant. It's very important. And if you're going to say something, right, if you fail in making that come about, right, that is sin. And so we have to be careful with what we're promising and the vows we're making and the oaths we're taking in that regard. But as it relates to as to marriage, whatever it is, the child dedication, right? To me, it just places an emphasis on the significance of what this vow is, right? Who it's before, and the continuing on in that the lifelong vow, faithfully, and with all of the energy and attention you can give to that thing, right? And so finally, these verses, I love to, whenever in the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm looking at all these different things that Jesus mentions, after each of these sections, I like to think about how Jesus fulfills these things, right? How he is the one who is really able to keep an oath, right? To keep his promises. And so I'll ask you guys, this is just a simple kind of, you can name it, but what makes Jesus able to keep his oaths? What is it about his nature that allows him to do this?
Well, I just was going to back up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Many people think about taking a vow or an oath, which is between the two people. But if we think of it differently, like the marriage vow is a three-party oath. It's you, your spouse, and God. Divorce was the loophole that the Jews sought to break that vow. But you're actually breaking the vow with God. And when Pastor Greg had the Malachi pass up, and they wouldn't accept his sacrifice, God wouldn't accept their sacrifice because you have just done this honestly with the vow with your wife by seeking divorce. So if you think about it, like if I'm going to make a vow, well, I got to break it with God first, and that might give you second pause, thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm just breaking my vow with this person here. No, God's involved, and you're actually breaking with God too. Yeah. And getting back to your question, what Jesus fulfills because being God, he's going to fulfill the truth of God. So.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a good reminder. Anyone else? What is it about Jesus that makes him able to keep oaths? If you just think about his nature, what he can and can't do.
Hypocrisy.
Okay.
So he is the truth, and so there is no falsehood in him.
Yeah. So there's no falsehood. So and with that, you can say that you can trust that the intention that he is saying is the intention that he has, right? If it's truth, right? Bob?
And we also say that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So he never changes.
Yeah.
So if he's going to make an oath, it's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? So, right, his love will never waver, right? So all the aspects of what it means that he doesn't change. There's a lot there. It's a big one, right? But I think like when people make rash vows, they're usually doing it because there's some kind of momentary desire. They want to accomplish that thing. They want to either manipulate a situation to have control over a situation, or they want to accomplish a certain thing in that moment, right? But their heart's affections might change over time, and so they might not follow through on that promise because in the 10 seconds since they've made it, their heart is aiming in another direction and going somewhere else, right? But with Jesus, it's not the case. The object of his love is always the same, right? His Father, us, right? These things don't change; they never waver. He doesn't love one thing one day and something else the next. He will never have a change in his reasoning or motivation to do something. And so, when he makes a promise, you can have the assurance that nothing has changed since the making of that promise, right, in his heart and his mind toward us or right, regarding that thing. So absolutely, that's a huge one. Anything else?
But we want to attribute to what he's promised.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
He said, I only do what my father tells me to do. So he's not telling him to break vows.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think one, just one last one is just his power, right? He's able to do what he says he's going to do, right? We make promises that I can't bring it about, right? I can't change the color of the hair on my head, right? Jesus can, if he wanted to, right? So he has the power to do these things. So whatever he is speaking, it comes to be. And so we can trust that the promise he makes, the oath, the vow, right, he will always possess the means to bring it about, right? He will always possess the power, the ability to do that thing. And we never have to doubt or question that, right? And so, there might be some here that struggle with flippant use of language, and so invoking the name of the Lord wrongly, and maybe that's the aspect of this that we need to kind of wrestle through, right? But perhaps for many of us, the passage is more about maybe like a relinquishing of control, right? A lot of times we make vows, we make these rash promises because we're trying to have control over a situation or something like that, right? But do we really trust that ultimately, right, the only one who never wavers on his promises is the Lord, right? Are we resting in that? Are we trusting that all the promises that are found in his word, that he will follow through on, and that we don't need to be the ones who are making oaths or promises. We can simply let our character be the thing that people look to and trust in figuring out if something that we say is going to come to pass or not, right? One commentator said this, which I really appreciated. He said, having to swear by oaths betrays the weakness of your word. It demonstrates that there is not enough weight in your own character to confirm your words. I thought that was really good. So there you go. Let's move on to the next set of verses. 38, 39 says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So again, Jesus is addressing another law that's and teaching associated with that law. This time it's from Exodus 21, 24. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. That's where he's calling back to this idea of like justice being met, right? Is there a fairness here? And what is being done to someone, and then the punishment being inflicted on that person. Leviticus 24:20, same kind of language there. Whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him. And then Deuteronomy 19:21 says much the same. So these verses are often quoted, and even for those who have never really read the Bible, you might have heard these things before. I think they're kind of common language in this realm. But there can be some confusion as we see the words of Jesus here. Like, what do you mean, turning my other cheek? What does this mean? Right? So to our modern ears, this sounds a little strange. But essentially what's happening, right, is I like the inclusion of right cheek is very significant. It doesn't seem like it is, but it's very significant. Because most people are what-handed? Right-handed. So what cheek are they going to hit if they're taking a smack at you? Your left cheek, right? So if it's a right cheek, it's a backhand. Or it's a lefty. I don't think it's a southpaw. I think it's a backhand. Right? So it's not, this guy's not coming at you to kill you, right? It's an insult. It's disrespect, right? That's kind of the idea here with what he's saying. Don't resist, right? Turn the other cheek also. So essentially, if we can kind of boil it down, it's right, we can use the language of not responding evil with evil. Right, there isn't this need to strike back or to insult back, right? The idea is bearing up patiently under this insult or this act of disrespect. And again, this passage is really speaking to a lot of our inability. And this time, it's not an inability to control the outcome. It's our inability to keep from going too far in the outcome that we want to have, right? Our inability to mete out this thing justly. Our temptation is, right, if once we permit retaliation in some aspects, right? The temptation then is to go too far, to go beyond the bounds of what's being prescribed for us in that. Right? And if justice were purely up to us, how many evils would escape us? How many of our judgments would be too lenient or too harsh? And so a lot of what this passage here is talking about is really about justice and trusting that the Lord is the one who's going to be able to mete out this thing justly, right? And trusting him to do that, to answer these things on our behalf. Because again, we are unable to do this perfectly and rightly as the Lord is. So it might be wise for us just to consider, how do we tend to respond in the face of these things? How do we retaliate, right? Is there a lashing out? Is there a return fire, right, in order to kind of take the heat off of us? Or do we allow the Lord to cover us, right? And so to bear under an insult in this way is what I think a true demonstration of our faith, right? And if we are able to bear up under an insult in this way, it's a demonstration that we believe that God, that he sees it, number one, and number two, that he will answer it in some way, whether now or down the road, but that he is the judge. He will judge all things. And so it seems to me for the Christian that, right, we ought never to consider the justice of the Lord for wrongs done against us without also considering the justice of the Lord for the wrongs that we ourselves have committed. And so the wonder, right, and we see this just in how, let's just read Isaiah 53, for instance. It says, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken and smitten by God, afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. And in this way, God is shown to be what Romans 3 says, to be the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So let's look at 40 through 42, because these are the ones that, these ones are also a little tricky to, these things aren't happening in our day and age, so it's hard for us to understand it. But let's take a look at verse 40. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. So both of these examples that he's giving here are both tied to, well, one's tied to the Old Testament law, right, the Mosaic law, and one's kind of tied to the present day, Jesus' time, legislation from the Romans. So if we go back to Exodus 22, it says, if ever you take your neighbor's cloak and pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. And what else shall he sleep? And then Deuteronomy 24, verse 13, you shall restore to him the pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you. So, according to the Old Testament law, it was unlawful to be taking this outer cloak, which is like their outerwear. But it was lawful for them to be suing for the tunic, right? The undergarments, like the main clothing piece. And so in this instance, what's being communicated then is that instead of seeking satisfaction in response to the offense, retaliating, we ought to have a heart that's willing to part with even what we might want to hold on to, or even what we're able to hold on legally, right? Or what we might be legally supported in keeping. Jesus is saying to have a heart willing to even part with those things. And then if this is the negative sense, right, not holding on to what we are supported in holding on to, verse 41 then gives us the flip, right, the positive sense, going beyond what's required. So at this time, remember the governing authority is Rome. This region is occupied by Roman forces, and under military law, any Roman soldier was allowed to command a Jew to carry his soldier's pack for 1 mile, but he could only require it for 1 mile. He couldn't ask for any more than 1 mile for it to be carried. And so what's Jesus saying here, right? To offer the additional, in addition to what the law requires of you, be willing to give, right? And to me, this kind of brought to mind Proverbs 25, the idea of, it says, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. The idea of kind of like returning evil for good, and in this case, someone is coming to you with a need that they have, right, if their enemy, And by providing that, by meeting their evil or their wrongdoing with good, you are heaping the burning coals on their head, right? It's like this. It's like a shame or humiliation, so to speak. So, right, essentially what's happening here, as we're going to see in the next passage that we won't read tonight, but we're treating an enemy as if they were not an enemy, right? Because you might offer, if you're a really kind person, if you really love the person who is giving you their pack for a mile, you might willingly offer the second mile if it was someone that you loved, right? But if it was a Roman soldier or someone that is opposed to you in some way, you're not likely to have that kind of heart toward that person, right? So the idea of traveling great distances speaks a lot to me personally. I remember when one of my brothers, so both my brothers served in the military, and I can't remember which brother it is because they both served at Fort Bragg in North Carolina at one point in their careers. So I forget which brother it is, but my mom at some point, for some reason, my brothers needed to get from home back to North Carolina, and they had to do so in a span of like 2 days. And I think the train down was canceled, and there was no flights down there at the time, so there was no way they could get there. And my mom, who's the best, she took my brother down to North Carolina and then had to come back immediately. Like she dropped them off and then immediately turned around and started driving back home again because she had to either go to work the next day or take care of something for one of us, probably me. But I still remember that act of love toward my brother because it really blew me away, the amount of time and the energy that she had to kind of put into that drive. It's a long drive. We make it once a year now, and it's hard just to get down there. Just one way is hard. Doing it twice, back to back with no sleep is really tough. So I right, to do it for someone you love is easy, or it might be easy to make that decision, but to do it for someone who you don't love, right, very hard. And so to consider that kind of heart posture toward those who might wrong us, I think is what Jesus is getting at here, and we're going to see it again in the next set of verses. Again, we won't get there tonight, but the heart of this passage isn't just to roll over in the face of wrong, right? Jesus resisted evil. That's why he went to the cross. It was an act of resisting evil in this world. He gave his life for those who were seeking to take it from him. That's what he did in the face of that evil. So 1 Peter 2 does a really, really good job at kind of summing up this idea. It says, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. And I think that's the perfect sum to me of how Jesus embodies what he's teaching here in these verses. Right? There are times when we are called to defend the weak, to protect those who are in danger, right? But he's calling us here to have a heart toward those who oppose us, right? That seeks good for them, that seeks their benefit, their welfare, showing that we actually believe what he says about who these people are as image bearers, right? His heart for them and longing to see them come to know him. And by us living this way, it shows that we agree with him concerning how he values people and his mission to seek and to save all who are lost. And I couldn't help but think, I'm like, as the hearer of this sermon, being challenged to do this, I could imagine someone offering a Roman soldier a second mile, and on that second mile, they get to share the gospel with them on that second mile. Imagine the opportunity that can come when you're able to, again, heap the coals on someone's head and metaphorically, but show them the love and the kindness that the Lord is calling us all to. I'll end with this. This was kind of, I threw it in here. This is kind of an afterthought. After I finished preparing for this evening, I was thinking through examples of people in Scripture who did not retaliate when they could have. And someone who I thought of immediately was Joseph. And his brothers come, so you guys know the story in Genesis 50. His brothers come to him, and I can imagine what was going through his head because I have brothers, and I know what it feels like to be wronged by them. And I can tell you I would not have responded the way you responded. I'd be off with you. But the way that he is able to not only withhold the wrath that he could have put upon them in that moment, right? But to fill their bags with grain, right? To bless their family, welcome them back in, right? Provide for them in this way. I think of what the Lord accomplished through Joseph choosing not to retaliate, right? What did the Lord accomplish? Well, everything from Genesis on, right, until Jesus coming, to like all these things that would not have happened, right, had Joseph chosen to get the eye for the eye, right, the tooth for the tooth. And so the deferring of justice, right, deferring it to the Lord, it might have surprising results in your life. And so I would encourage you not to doubt the good that God can bring from evil being done to you and you not responding in like kind, right? But that's all. Any other examples? That's really all I had. But that's one example I was thinking of. Another one I thought of was of Jacob and Esau, right? When Jacob was sending all of his servants on ahead of him and his kids, and then he comes out at the end, drawing up the rear. But any other examples maybe I've missed of good coming from not retaliating? Robin?
Talking about the Roman soldier in the second mile, I was thinking about Jesus on the cross and him saying, Father, forgive them, but they don't know what they do. And then the centurion believing as a result of all the things that he saw on the cross.
Yeah, that's sweet.
The context of the eye for an eye was the justice code that the Israelites were living under, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody did take somebody's eye out, to me, it wasn't clear. It says, then the other person's eye shall be taken out. It's not clear whether the person whose eye got pushed out gets to do it, or if it's the authorities get to do it. But I think what this is saying is, there is a system of justice, but mercy's better than that.
Yeah.
So the person that gets their eye poked out, it doesn't say the other person has to have their eye poked out.
Correct. Which I think is where the religious leaders were erring, right? So the law was a way to limit the people from going too far in their so you think about, the clearest example I could think of was Pharaoh, right? Moses and Aaron, the very first time they ask him to let their people go, his immediate answer is, get back to work. By the way, you don't have any straw, and you have to make the same amount of bricks, right? That was a harsh penalty for just a question that Moses and Aaron asked, right? But that to me was, okay, if we can look at Egypt and imagine the rest of the ancient world to be behaving in like kinds, right? This is part of the course. This is harsh punishment for not really a big deal. And so I think in the Mosaic Law, a lot of what the Lord does is he kind of pulls Israel back, essentially, from all the ways that the world is erring around them. And so in this way, it's not going too far in punishment. It's kind of scaling it back, so to speak. But the religious leaders, what they would do is they would almost now demand, instead of that being like the ceiling, now that's the floor now. And so now, even in every little interpersonal relationship you have, any wrong that's done to you, keeping a little tally book of all the things that were taken from you, and then having license now to go and do all these things to other people, because that's what the law requires, right? And so,
And no allowance for mercy. You don't have to do it,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's why I love I think Micah 6:8, right? What's his Lord require but to do justice, right? And love kindness, I think is the next phrase. I love the pairing of the justice and the kindness. Or is it mercy? I forget. But okay, and I think in the ESV it might be kindness. But either way, right? Those two things being paired together, and they're not really meant to be separated in that way, because that's the Lord's heart. He's all these things, and He's all of them all at once equally. Yep.
I think one thing, I think it was in Egypt, but like a non-believer or at least a non-Jew is like when Abraham and Sarah, I think their name changed by this point, they went and I think it was the king of Egypt really liked Sarah. He's like, oh yeah, she's my sister, And so he takes her and and then it comes out like,
Don't do that.
but they're married, and he was like, what are you doing to me? Why did you tell me she was your sister? Like, he could have just been like, you know what? I'm done. Y'all just, killed him or whatever, thrown him in the dungeon. He was just like, please leave. Like,
Yeah.
and now it's a mercy.
A couple of times.
Right, but, that was such a kindness because
Mhm.
he was like, he did him wrong, right?
Yeah, and the good that was accomplished in, not in Abraham's lack of retaliation, but this non-believing king, right? Yeah. Bob?
Well, when Jesus is going through the Samaritan village and he's not welcome there, so James and John, who James just names the sons of thunder, said, Lord, do you want us to bring down fire and burn them all up?
Yeah.
He says, no, you don't know what kind of spirit you have.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
example.
that's a good one. Yeah. Kind of humorous one, but yeah.
Be talking about that just the other day, and they said, it could be that Jesus was telling them, you don't know in what age you're living, right? This is the age of grace, because there are going to be two witnesses that are going to call down fire from heaven
Yeah.
at the end, you know, as much as they want.
We won't be here, Mark.
I'm just saying it's a different
Yeah.
dispensation.
I had a quick thought. I don't know if this exactly fits the mold, but I had the thought of just Moses' heart and interceding for the people whenever whenever there was a large-scale rebellion, the Lord was ready to start over with Moses. And Moses said, please, don't do that. Just that kind of heart posture. And just the tremendous good that can come out of deferring, right, to the Lord's authority and right, his faithfulness to do things well in a way that we can't. Well, with that, let's pray. Father, we are grateful for the wisdom that's found in your word, or that we get to rely upon you, or we don't have to rely on our own wisdom or what we think is wisdom, but we have it truly and fully found in you, in who you are, or in what your word says. And so, Lord, I ask that all of us here would, or as we read passages like these that speak of the things that flow out of us, or that you would give us eyes to kind of catch these things as they flow out of us. And Lord, give us the eyes to trace them back, or to the source, or that we might find where we don't quite maybe believe what your word says, or don't quite trust who you are, and Lord, that you would change that part in us, Lord, that you give us a greater trust in your character, in your person, or in your ability to do all things well and rightly. And Lord, I pray that we would be a people that demonstrate your heart well to those around us, Lord, and so that as we conduct ourselves, as we aim to make, Lord, the law of your kingdom, or the law for our lives right now, that there'd be visible effects, Lord, in the lives that we live, or that those around us would see, Lord, how good it is, Lord, to walk with you, and or the joy that it brings when we live in accordance to what your word says. Lord, so we are grateful for this opportunity to consider these things together. Lord, help us to be accountable to one another in this, Lord, as we endeavor to please you, Lord, with our lives. So bless us as we go. We praise in Jesus' name. Amen.